finished watching a new show on Netflix that came out this year. It's a murder mystery called The Residence. How many of you have seen it? A few of you. I really appreciate every now and then a good whodunit, and this is a really good one. It's a fictional story, of course, about a murder in the White House, and it's on the night of a state dinner for the Australian Prime Minister when the body of the chief usher of the White House is found by the mother-in-law of the president. And Detective Cordelia Cupp, right there in the center of the screen, is a very eccentric detective who does a lot of birding during her investigation. We first find her with those binoculars in the courtyard of the White House birding while the murder just happened inside. But she arrives on the scene. She's called in from the Metro Police because there's rarely a case that she hasn't been able to solve. She's the best of the best. But she does so in a way that is very unconventional and really upsets a lot of people. Because when she arrives on the scene of the murder, the usher is still where he is found, and she takes in every detail of the room and of his body. And there is a suicide note, what seems to be a suicide note that's found in his pocket. So everyone is convinced that this was a suicide, right? But not Detective Cupp. She is convinced that he was murdered, and so she orders for the entire White House to be on lockdown so that she can investigate and interview everyone in the White House that very night. So that night, everyone, including a host of distinguished guests from Australia, are held captive in the White House. And there are some funny moments throughout because she's just so quirky and very likable, but it's also frustrating for everyone there. Some key people in the house want her to just close the case, right? To call it a suicide. It's obvious that it is, to move on. But she is so persistent, and she keeps investigating and digging deeper. And she has this way throughout the series of empowering people to keep talking until she got to the truth and to the right answers. She herself was empowered to not stop, knowing that with every new piece of evidence, she was one step closer to the answer. And in the end, she, of course, finds out the answer and the murder, and she leaves everyone stunned, right? Well, we've been talking in the last few weeks now about the ways that Jesus was a change maker, and how we can be change makers in our own communities as well, just like Jesus. And we see in our story today that you just heard from Brian that Jesus was a change maker that didn't give up, was not willing to give up. Now, this story is not a story that might not be familiar to many of you, even if you grew up in church. Yesterday, when Richie asked me what I was preaching on today, I said the healing of Bartimaeus, and he said, "Remind me of that one?" So do not be ashamed if you are, remind me of this one. So let's dig a little deeper into it together. It has some good things for us to take away from it. There are some clues that give us a pretty good visual depiction of Bartimaeus from the beginning. He's sitting along the side of the road, just outside the city. He's blind, not able to see, and he is begging for money. He is the poorest of the poor. And we can also tell that he faces a lot of social exclusion by the ways that others are treating him. His position also probably kept him from having much of a household. We're told that he's the son of someone, but in this situation, in that day and place, it would be difficult for him to have a family, to work for an income to sustain himself or a spouse or kids. So he's all alone. But we see him being persistent. He shouted to Jesus as he passed by, even when others told him to be quiet. And what I love in particular about this, and what kind of sets it apart from other healing stories that we read in the Gospels, is that Bartimaeus confesses his faith in Jesus even before he's healed. And there are two parts in particular that I think are important for us to note. The first part is the way that Bartimaeus throws off his cloak when Jesus calls for him to come near. But before we go there, I hope you'll stay with me. I want us to go back a little bit in the Gospel of Mark, just earlier in this chapter. And I want to talk a bit about what happened. So Jesus and his disciples are walking, and there's a man that runs up to him and kneels before him and asks him what he must do to inherit eternal life. This happens a number of different times in the Gospels, right? And so Jesus tells him some of the commandments that we would remember from the 10 Commandments that Moses gave. And the man says, well, I've kept all of those. So Jesus looks at him. Mark is clear to say that Jesus loved him, loved this man, and then he says, you lack one thing. Go, sell what you own and give the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come and follow me. So then he continues to tell his disciples how hard it is for the wealthy to enter the kingdom of God. And he talks about the last being first and the first being last. And so there's a little bit of some other things that happen then in between there before we get to the story of Bartimaeus. But I think they're not too far away from each other for us to get a good contrast of this wealthy man and Bartimaeus. When Jesus called him to come forward, Mark is very specific to tell us how, throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. That might not seem like a very big deal to us, but I want us to think about this for a minute. The cloak that this man is wearing isn't a fashion statement. For him, it's something that keeps him warm. It allows him to sleep at night, or he can throw it in front of him when he's asking for money and collecting it. But a cloak is also, in this time, a sign of status and power. Earlier in Mark, you might know the story. There's a woman who has been bleeding, and she's in this crowded place where Jesus is walking through, and she says, if I can just touch his cloak, then I'll be healed. And she does. She touches his cloak, and she's healed. And there's a couple other instances in Mark where that same thing happens. People touch Jesus' cloak, and they're healed. And after this passage, Jesus is going to go into Jerusalem, and just days before he's arrested and killed, he's welcomed into Jerusalem by people taking off their cloaks and putting it on the ground to welcome him. And so if a cloak in this time is a sign of status and power, well, it's the only power that Bartimaeus owns, which is very little. And Bartimaeus casts away, he puts away, leaves behind his only valuable belonging in order to go and be healed by Jesus. And I wonder, are there things that we hold on to that keep us from experiencing healing or fullness of life in Jesus? I mentioned last week these commitment cards. So this is a green card that we have. Some of them have been sent in the mail. We have a few in the back that you're welcome to take with you if you did not receive them in the mail. But I wanted to talk just a little bit about them today. Now, of course, there might be some thoughts going in your mind. These cards are used in our budgeting every year. The number that you commit to on here to give in 2026 helps us to get a good idea for what we can expect so that we can responsibly plan for the future, for the needs of our church and our ministries. But money is not the only thing on this card, and we're very intentional about that. Also on this card are all the commitments that are made when someone becomes a disciple of Jesus here at Linglestown Life. You heard them minutes ago when Natalie joined our church. They commit to supporting the church through their prayers, their presence, their gifts, their service, and their witness. 5 different things. And so you'll see them listed, maybe not those same exact words, but those 5 things are on the commitment card. And some of those areas might be easier to fulfill than others, but all of them require a bit of letting go. All of them require some sort of sacrifice. They require creating space in your life for worship and prayer. They require opening yourself up to growing in community with others. They require setting aside time using the gifts that God has given you to serve in some capacity. They also require budgeting your own income and asking God to help you discern how much you might be able to give, trusting that God will take care of all of your other needs when you trust in God and give. And they also require reaching beyond your comfort zone, right? Sharing your faith. That big E evangelism word might be difficult, so witness is kind of a softer word, but it's all about inviting others to experience what you experience. Now, I understand that times are very difficult, and you might not be able to commit to everything on this card. You might not be able to commit to the things that you'd like to, and we understand that. But I invite you to just start praying over this card if you haven't already. One of our council members on our leadership council told us at the last meeting how when they got this in the mail, they put it next to their coffee maker. And so every morning they look at it and they think about it and they pray over it. And then someone else said, just keep adding another 0 every day. Don't do that. Just keep thinking and praying about it. And perhaps as you pray, you can ask Jesus this. What is holding me back, Jesus, from walking with you? What can I let go of in my life to make space for fullness of life with you? And then I hope that you'll prayerfully fill this out, bring it back next week as we celebrate all that God is doing here in this space with what we bring to God. So back to Bartimaeus. Bartimaeus is so confident in Jesus' ability to heal him, and he is healed. But perhaps my favorite part of the story is that it doesn't end there. So this is the second piece, right? The first is that he takes off his cloak, but here's the second piece. Mark tells him that he regained his sight and followed him on the way. That's another little part that we might not think much about, but it's so important. So spoiler alert, I mentioned it earlier, literally right after this, we go into chapter 11, and Jesus is making his triumphal entry into Jerusalem. And he will soon experience his arrest and persecution and sentencing and death. All of that will happen. And Bartimaeus follows him the whole way there. He's with him in the final days of his life. His experience with Jesus transforms his life. He's not just healed and stays there, he goes with him, and we can see that change in his actions and in his newfound purpose. You know, when we help someone, helping isn't the end goal, right? If we really want to create change, we can't just reverse a bad situation. If we want to create change, we need to think about how our actions can lead to transformation for more people to join on the way, for more people to know Jesus. Throughout this series, I've also been talking about our new vision that the leadership and I crafted earlier this year, and we've come to the end of our statement now. I've been taking it apart and talking about the values that are so very important to all of this as a whole. So our vision statement, will you say it with me? We envision a community where all are met with love, find acceptance, and are transformed through Jesus. I'll talk a little bit about this more next week, but I am excited about all the ways that we are already living into this together, and also about the other things that we have plans for this year. In the past few months, we've expanded our hospitality ministry in beautiful ways. We've hired a youth director. We have hopes of hiring a children's director to engage our families in new ways as well. We also hope, in light of our vision, to create systems for things like congregational care, supporting folks who can't be here in worship with us on Sunday mornings. And we also hope to grow a greater connection to our community and the ways that we can support our neighbors and the organizations around us that are doing good things. There are so many exciting things ahead, my friends, and I hope that you will join us for the ride. But our vision is what we believe God's preferred future and dream is for us, and that's important to remember. It's not like we, just say it and we've made it. It's God's preferred future for us. So in all that we do, We want to make sure that it aligns with our vision. The things that we've already been doing and the new things that we create, we want to make sure it aligns with our vision, because if it doesn't, then it's not worth doing, right? It's not what God is calling us towards. So in all that we do also, we need to make sure that all are met with love, that all find acceptance, but I believe that also those two things don't matter at all if it doesn't lead to transformation. Everything we do because of Jesus' calling on our lives. Everything we do out of a response to Jesus' love and our desire for more people to experience that love and transformation that we ourselves have experienced. The last of our core values that help us stay focused on this vision is creating space for spiritual growth and new life. So we just don't want others to gather and have activities that are fun. Of course, we love having fun together, and we love doing things that have fun. But in all that we do, we really want to create spaces where we can grow together and find new life, where there's meaning in them. And all that we do, we want to create spaces where that transformation can happen. So what sets us apart from other community groups or other nonprofits that do good is our united faith in Jesus, right? And that's not to say that we're better or more superior than others who are doing a lot of good in the world. It's just that our faith in Jesus should be seen in everything that we do. Bartimaeus wasn't just healed, he was transformed, and it made all the difference. We've been talking also in these past several weeks about how easy it is right now to keep the status quo, right? It's so easy to keep our heads down and to just keep trying to move forward in our own way. And maybe that's even what others want from us, but Jesus calls us to a different way of life. Jesus calls us to a life of stepping out from the shadows and being empowered to make a change for the better. Detective Cupp in the Residence show, she knew that a murder had happened in the White House, and she kept investigating until she got her answer. But I want to share one more story from this show with you that happens towards the end. One of the captivating parts of the show is that it went back and forth between the murder happening, the night of the murder at the White House, and a congressional hearing that happened on the murder weeks, maybe even months after it had happened. So it kept going back and forth between people who were on the witness stand and this night. And then it ends, the last episode is a closed hearing with Detective Cupp, and she's ready to tell them who the murderer is. And when they ask her if she knows the killer, she says, yes. And they say, well, are you going to tell us who it is? And she says, don't you want to know how I figured it out first? She was so persistent, right? Even in the end, she was calculated in how everything came together. She refused to go along with the status quo, and it made all the difference. And I think that's really hard for us to do in our day-to-day life. The problems all around us can seem so insurmountable, but one small step can lead to change. You will notice inside your bulletins as well a white sheet of paper, a little tiny sheet. We've been doing this throughout this series. Every week we've asked you a question for a paper offering, we've called it. A question for you to think about being a change maker, to write it down and to bring it to our baskets, our little nests up front. And so the question I invite you to consider today, one last question, is what is holding you back right now from fullness of life? What is God asking you to let go of in order to experience transformation, maybe for you or for others? Perhaps there are some fears or some doubts in your life that are getting in your way of making a change. Maybe there are more obstacles, but whatever it is, I invite you to take some time to think about it.